She holds a BA in Christian counseling, an MA in theology, and trained for 9 years through supervision with a licensed clinical psychologist. Her specialty areas include helping clients struggling with addiction, substance abuse, pornography, sexual abuse, same-sex attractions, enmeshed relationships, and marital problems. She resides in Lake Elsinore, California, with her husband and her son, and she seems well-equipped to help us with all of our issues. Please welcome Andria Sigler Smalz. I'm getting training in masculinity. This is my Home Depot face. Okay. I don't think it's going anywhere. Is that good? You're not doing aerobics up here, are you? Okay, good. You're good.
Test. Is this good? Okay. So last night, we were walking around Asheville. Anybody else out there last night? Did you see the drumming, the drum festival? I saw it too. I wanted to get out there and dance, but you know what stopped me? Thinking some of you might be out there walking around and recognize me. So what I wanted to talk about today was the process of healing and perspectives from theology, psychology, clinical practice, and personal experience. I'm going to integrate it all together. And I'm also going to present it like a top 10 list. So none of these points have to be related to each other. It's just going to be a top 10 list. And is that Johnny Carson that used to do that? Is that David Letterman? I'm not as funny as him, so you're just going to have to suffer through. But I hope that that although not all of these top 10 might apply to you, that maybe you'll get something out of a few of them that you can take with you today. I know personally that it takes great courage to embark on a journey of personal wholeness. In this general session, we're going to look at some really key elements to growth and change, especially where it pertains to homosexuality and sexual addiction and compulsive relationships. But before I start there, and this is number 1 of my top 10, we need to define what we mean by healing and change, because I know those are really loaded words. So I have kind of my own definition of the word change. And this applies to someone whether they're dealing with homosexuality or any life issue. We know from a theological perspective that salvation is talked about biblically in 3 points. It talks about the fact that we've been saved, right? That was that point that we accepted Christ into our life. We became these new creatures in Him, and we are heaven-bound. But there's also the being saved, the fact that we are day by day changing and growing into His image. So that's a present tense. We are being saved. And then it talks about that future tense, that will be saved, that someday we're not going to struggle anymore. We're going to be with our Lord forever. So salvation is this 3-part continuum, and we are somewhere in that continuum. If we look at the topic of creation and the fall, originally man was oriented towards who? God. We were need-oriented. We needed each other. We had feelings. There were thoughts. There was the need for purpose and meaning in life. There was relational connection. It was the way God had intended us to be. It was His design. And then comes the fall. And then after the fall, we now had this dual nature. We not only have the capacity for being oriented towards God, but now we are very much oriented towards the flesh. We have this whole other line of vision that we didn't have prior to sin. So we need an orientation change. Every single person that walks the face of this earth needs an orientation change. And what's that orientation change? We need that change away from the fallen nature, the desires of the flesh, to the nature that desires God. That's the part of ourselves we want to build up. And that's what change means. Change means that we are growing daily in our relationship with the Lord in healthier connection towards one another and becoming more like Him. So where's our identity? Is it in our human nature, or is it in our spiritual nature? Is it in the fact that we are an ex-adulterer, ex-liar, ex-gay, ex-alcoholic, ex-drinker, ex-whatever? Or is it in the fact that we are a Christ follower? We are a Christ follower. Is our identity in him? Is that how we think of ourselves? Or do we separate ourselves apart from the rest of humanity as if we have some strange and unique problem? Okay. We don't. I've run support groups, and in these support groups, there are people who struggle with drugs, alcohol, sexual abuse, cigarette smoking, picking lint up off the carpet obsessively. It doesn't matter. When everybody gets to talking, the core issue is their pain, their unmet needs, their disconnection from God, their disconnection from others. We all need an orientation change. My top 10, number 2, is that our heart will determine the lens or the way we see. We talk about that verse in Proverbs 4:23 that tells us to guard our heart above all else, for it determines the course of our life. I think what this is telling us is that where we allow our heart to attach is going to dictate the decisions we make about our life, and possibly even how we skew reality to enable ourselves to make those decisions. Have you ever watched or listened to yourself when you've decided there's something that you want to do that maybe a part of you knows you shouldn't do? Have you watched yourself stepping yourself through this addictive logic to get there, to enable it to be the most reasonable decision you've ever thought about, okay? As human beings, we are masters at the art of case building. That means when we've decided that there's something we want or there's a course of action we want to pursue, that we are masters at ignoring facts that could deter us, and we're incredibly creative at highlighting or even drumming up facts that enable us to justify acting out our desires. This is why we're told to guard our heart. If there's any young people here today, or even some of us middle-aged or older people, have you ever wondered why some things are called sin and other things are not? I've had clients come into my office all the time, and especially young ones, college-age ones. Their only idea about why something is called sin is because there's this arbitrary God or these parents who have just decided, let me think, I'll call this sin and I'll call this good, and it's all just a big game to make you not do the things that are fun. The rules that God has laid out are laid out to preserve life. The things that are sin are life-destructive. The things that are not sin are life-preserving. They lead to life. That's why it's sin. It's how God designed things to work. We came here to the conference via RV. We're just doing a coast-to-coast trip, myself and my family. And in Arkansas, we stopped to visit a friend of my son's. We knew this little guy, TJ, from the time he was young, and he's living in Arkansas now. And TJ now has a driver's license. So he was very proud to have us ride in the back seat while he took us to a restaurant. And I have to be honest, it tested my faith to the max. I was scared. Here he is, 20-year-old lanky kid. The steering wheel's in the crook of his wrist. Seats back. Music looking for the next thing. And then when he wasn't doing this, he was gangster rapping or doing some strange things with his hands, okay? At one point, he almost hit the car in front of him. At the last minute, saw it and swerved around, and I was praying, oh, Lord Jesus, help us. Just get us to Applebee's. Now, this young man probably has taken the same driver's education courses we all have taken. He's listened to the same advice. But what makes him blow off all the rules about doing the life-preserving things? I think it's because he's out of touch with his heart. He's not guarding his heart. He's not aware of his agendas, that he wants to look cool in front of us, that he wants to show us, what an individual he now is and how he has his own life. He's not in touch with his fear and his mortality. When we don't guard our hearts, we are more able to enter into behaviors that are life-destructive. Pardon me? When we don't guard our hearts, that's what I meant. Thank you. Healing and change requires an honest heart that desires God and is able to suffer that temporary loss, those little losses of the moment of thinking you look good in front of someone or getting this thing that's going to make us feel good in that moment. Losing those temporary desires and unhealthy agendas that contradict what is good and right for us in the big picture. We need to seek God, and we need to guard our hearts above all things. Number 3 on my top 10 list. Our motivation determines success. And what I call success is just a continual growth pattern. It's not necessarily ever arriving anywhere. It's just that every day by day, we grow a little bit. We learn something new. We practice something new. So, what's your motivation? I have to search mine all the time. What's my motivation for teaching at this conference? What's your motivation for being here at this conference? What's your motivation for seeking to deal with your same-sex attractions or relational issues of any kind in our lives? Why do we do what we do? I have found for clients that come into my room, if their motivation is because God says it's wrong, Mom made me come in here, my pastor said I have to do this if I'm going to lead worship, any of these extrinsic motivations do not carry us towards growth. It just becomes one more place to please people in our life, one more place to get the atta-girl, atta-boy. It deteriorates us. It does not help us grow. When I was young, my life was out of control with drugs and alcohol and all kinds of crazy relationships. I needed God to help me see the culture of death that I was living, that I was pursuing, and to get a glimpse of what life would be like without it. It's kind of like a cigarette smoker going to a cancer ward and seeing people with lung cancer. It's a reality that slaps you in the face. We have to get to a place where we want change. And remember what I mean by change. Okay? We want growth. It was when I began to see that my motivation became intrinsic instead of extrinsic. I'll often ask clients when I sense that their motivations are something other than their own, I'll say, what if you see me for counseling for 5 years and go to church and pray and read your Bible and do everything you think you're supposed to do, and your same-sex attractions still persist? What will you do? And that's when I typically hear the real motives. And we can begin to maybe refine those motives and search for some that are going to stand the test of time. Number 4, a willingness to utilize available resources. I'm sure everybody has read 2 Kings chapter 5, the account of Naaman and Elijah. Everyone? It's one of my favorite. The reason it's my favorite is because Naaman had a problem. And his king sends him with a letter to the king of Israel to get healed of his leprosy. The king of Israel doesn't know what to do with him, but there is a prophet in Israel, and it's Elijah, so he goes to Elijah. Now, Naaman has a letter from the king. Naaman is an important guy. He's also got an entourage of people, and he's got incredible presence and gifts, and he's an important man, and he's coming in all his glory. And he comes, and Elijah, what does he do? Elijah sends a messenger out, a lowly messenger, to tell him, you want to get healed? There's a Jordan River over there. It's pretty filthy, but go dip in it 7 times. Now, Elijah had an incredible narcissistic injury at that point. He says, I expected this holy man to come out, wave his hands at me, do something incredible, right? Some kind of fanfare, and heal me. And he wanted to be healed, obviously, quickly. It doesn't work that way. Sometimes we have to dip in some filthy waters. Sometimes we have to take lots of time. This tendency we want to just get healed now, to have all our problems end now, to have the same-sex attractions end now, it's not going to happen. It's not how God works. If we look at Jesus, in the desert, he had the temptation. He had the ability to have instant need satisfaction in those three temptations, instant glory, and instant safety. Basically, if you sum it up, that's what Satan tempted him with. He turned down all of those temptations, and he went the way of the cross. It's going to be the same thing for us. We have to be available to all the resources God puts in our pathway. Prayer, church, men's groups, therapy, mentoring. What are we willing to invest in our health? What is it worth to us? Or are we going to be like Naaman and say, no, I want to be healed my way? Number 5, we need to identify our compulsive behaviors, our addictions, and our enmeshed relationships, and get the help we need. This is core to our healing. Somebody told me there's a clock somewhere. I can't see it. Thank you. That's how much time I have left? Okay. So this is core to our healing. Our compulsivity, our addiction, and our enmeshment, all of those things are driven by unmet needs. Does everyone know what I mean by enmeshment? It's where those little glue-on-glue relationships that we're familiar with? Okay. So these things are driven by our unmet needs and our lack of insight and our lack of ability to manage them. Addictions are emotional illusions. It's a false belief that we hold that if we think or we act, where we think or we act as if there's something outside of ourselves, whether it be a substance or whether it be a person or whether it be an action, that this thing is capable of completing me. It's capable of bringing around about this mood-altering experience that is going to make me okay. So why do we pursue these things? If we all stop and think about it, if we catch ourselves in the middle of being driven towards whatever our addiction or compulsions or enmeshed relationships might be, we'll realize that we're trying to fill a void inside. There's a void in our life of healthy attachment. We want connection. We were created for connection. And there's a void in our hearts for that, and we're trying to stuff whatever into that void so we don't feel so isolated, we don't feel so alone. We're trying sometimes to create a mood change. We're feeling bad, we want to give ourselves a treat. We've done good, we want to give ourselves a treat. Whatever it is, we want to give ourselves a little lift, a little bit of a pickup, and feel better. We want to avoid unpleasant feelings. We've come to believe that we should feel good and that there's something wrong if we don't. So we want to avoid those feelings, so we act out in whatever our addiction is. Sometimes we want to avoid responsibilities. It's hard to grow up. It's hard to grow up and not just get what we want when we want it. It's hard to have delayed gratification that is required of adults to work, to get somewhere, to achieve something so we can really be proud of ourselves, not just pretend we're proud of ourselves. And sometimes we just want something that's always available that can be counted on. That porn, that cigarette, that person that we know so attached to us will always be on the other end of the phone. We just want something that we know will be there when we want it there. Or we want to nurture ourselves. Or we want to find a way to get somebody else to nurture us, and then we're saved from the work of it. And lastly, we want to control the natural cycles of life. And what I mean by natural life cycles is life is not meant to be flat line, and it's not meant to be lived always happy. In life, we have highs, and we have lows, and we have everything in between, and it's supposed to be that way. In addiction, we try to control those cycles, and we want to always live on the mountaintop. We want to always live feeling good. The problem is that the mood change that's brought about when we engage our drug of choice, so to speak, only creates this illusion of resolve. The better feelings, they're momentary, and they're always dependent on something outside of us. They don't last. When we don't learn to manage our dependent relationships, when we don't learn to manage our addictions, our life will begin revolving around them. The focus of our life will be the pursuit of that person or that addiction. I've seen young people or old people who are in a relationship where they cannot not have contact for any length of time, or the anxiety begins to well up in them. So I look at compulsivity, enmeshed relationships, sexual addiction, porn addiction. They're all cheap substitutes for the real thing. And what is the real thing? The real thing is healthy attachment. It's healthy intimacy in relationships. It's not true that God is all we need. The reason it's not true is because God didn't create us that way, right? He created us to need Him, of course, but He created us to need each other, and He created us to need a partner, and maybe even children, and to need our pets. He created us to need. Something else about addiction. Addiction is about intensity. But we have to understand that intensity does not equal intimacy. I work with clients who will say, they'll just start maybe a home group in their church. And what they'll say to me is that, well, I just don't feel connected. I want to share my past. I want to share this and that. I want people to know me so I can feel connected. And what they're really telling me, because we're talking about a 2 or 3 week home group experience, is that it's not feeling intense. It's going through those normal stages of friendship where you just, how's the weather? And nice day out today. And then it builds to maybe sharing about your thoughts, and over time about your feelings. And then intimacy takes years to develop. But we go for the intensity when we have these addictive personalities. We want to feel intimate now. We want to feel connected fast. And that's what we go for. And so that's why we say, I don't feel connected unless I'm sharing deeply. What we really mean is it's not intense enough. We're still operating in that addictive personality. If you have a relationship that went from 0 to broil in a matter of a few months, you have intensity, not intimacy. Okay? And I don't know if it's okay to tell this joke, but somebody told it to me one time and they laughed, so I'm going to share it with you. And you can edit it out if it's not okay. But they said, the joke was, what does a lesbian bring on her first date? A U-Haul. Okay. Intensity, 0 to broil. Okay. If there is inappropriate physical contact, you are going for the intensity. If we feel the most connected when there's a lot of drama taking place, that's intensity. If we only feel connected during sexual activity, that's intensity. And if our world revolves around that other person or pursuing that sexual act, and we find ourselves giving up parts of ourselves in order to have them or it, that's intensity.